Good evening, everyone. Tonight we are going to have a look at the novel that you've done. We're going to concentrate, of course, on the elements of the novel. And then I've set you a kind of mock exam question. And I hope that we have time for you to work on the introduction. What I've previously found worked quite well. If you work very hard on the structure of the introduction, the rest of your essay follows logically, and because you feel at ease working on the introduction, it has a calming effect and you can concentrate so much better when you get to the rest of your essay. But let's have a look at the rules for the meeting quickly. You have to switch off your video and your microphone. You have to write your student number in the chat. All queries, especially if you still have technical queries, should go to ctintat@unisa.ac.za. If you have any problem with the English, your first port of call is your e-tutor, but you can also write to me at italian@unisa.ac.za. There is a feedback form under files and the session is being recorded. Our next class is on the 19th of October and we'll keep it to 5:30 again. So let's start. I checked the emails early this morning. I haven't checked it since, but the ENG1501 department promises regular updates to prepare you for the exam. So I suggest that at least once a day, just check the announcements from the ENG department, because I get the idea that they really want to help you with this exam. And then apparently I don't work on the e-reserves anymore because I have I've downloaded everything by now. But if you have any problems, they've published a PDF to help you to access the e-reserves. Apparently, currently, there is a problem and you need to do something else to get to the e-reserves at the moment. So let's tackle the elements of the novel. We spoke about the short story on Saturday, and there isn't a difference between a short story and a novel in the elements. Like the short story, we have the setting, we have characterization, we have narration and the narrative point of view, we have the plot, and all these things work together to move into the abstract, to move towards the theme. There's interaction between all of them. But by the very length of the novel, all of these can become much more complex. If you think of the short stories, for instance, if you think in terms of I will not apologize, we see the girl upstairs in her room, we see her with her grandmother, and we see her when she flushes her grandmother's dentures down the toilet. But the action is confined within one house. In a novel, we can have more than one setting, more than one venue for the events. Now, if we look at these elements in detail, the setting of small things. We have two eras. We have apartheid and we have post-apartheid. And it's interesting, you need to look at the tense of the verbs as he tells the story. Because when he switches to the present tense, it becomes far more intense and it actually becomes stream of consciousness. We know what he is thinking and what he is experiencing. And then, of course, the setting implies movement. As in the place, he moves physically in the book. He's born in Sophia Town, then moves to Soweto, and from there he moves, after he has been in jail, he moves to Johannesburg. But if you look at it, remember he crosses the bridge all the time. Now, like there's movement between venues, there's also movement between times, and that all work into the theme of a country in transition. And it is reflected and emphasized in a different way with Gabriel and Mercedes. They've also been through a revolution, a struggle. Then they moved from Cuba to South Africa and they moved back. So do you see that the reasons for the movement becomes a commentary on the revolution, and we'll speak about that again later in the workshop. Now, if we look at characterization, it's important that when you in the exam, you will most probably get an extract like you had for the assignment. Now remember, a character reveals himself in more, or him or herself in more than one way. Obviously, it's often the things that they say, the way that they say it, or in the main character or the narrator in small things. It often has to do with what he doesn't say. Remember, it's a recurring a commentary, both from Desiree and from Mercedes, that they don't know what he's thinking. He is too quiet. He's too obsessed with himself. So it is what a character say or doesn't say, or when he doesn't respond, that we get to know something about the character. Then it is in the actions that they take or don't take. For instance, in spite of the danger of the apartheid police, the narrator has the courage or blind stupidity to keep on writing anti-apartheid articles. For that, he is imprisoned and he keeps That's one, it's kind of a matter of pride with him, that even though he had been in jail for 18 years, he had never betrayed anybody. So those are his actions. When he comes out, he starts working at that tourism office, and then he loses that work. And then he doesn't use the people, because there's a difference between nepotism and networking. Nepotism would mean I'm involved with a school, you've been my student, regardless of whether I know or don't know you, and regardless of your marks, I appoint you at my school. That would be nepotism. Network would be I'm the facilitator at your workshops, and I know that they are looking for teachers or teachers' assistants at a local school. And I post it to Teams so that you have an opportunity to apply, and then you will be evaluated against other candidates. So he doesn't use his network. He needn't have asked Comrade Q for a job. He could have asked him for an introduction. So do you see, by his actions or his inactions, we get to know something about his character. Then also in his reactions. How does he react to Desiree? How does he react to her when she moves in with him? How does he react when she overdoses and ends up in hospital in a coma? How does he react to Amuzu? And how does he fulfill his responsibilities in the house that he shares with him? How does he react to the job that he has at Cafe Mesopotamia? So it's not only our actions, but also our reactions that reveal our character. Then it's also the appearance, because if and how people react to other people's appearance, the way that he describes the patrons in Cafe Mesopotamia, the way that he refers to their clothes. Their clothes refer something about themselves. It seems as if the women are dressing provocatively. But the fact that that's what he notices also says something about him. So if you see a character or they ask you something about characterization, you need to look at the dialogue, and remember the dialogue need not always be words. It can also be like the letter that Mercedes sends him towards the end of the novel. It's the actions that they take and the reactions to other people's behavior and their own appearance and the way that they react to other people, the other character's appearance that tells us something about the character. Then the narration and the narrative point of view. In this case, we have a first-person narrator, and it's not always a reliable relator. It's not as bad as, as the book that they did last year in Catcher of the Rye. The guy really knew nothing about himself. But I think in this case, the narrator does grow into a certain amount of self-awareness and self-actualization, and then he becomes, to my mind, a more reliable narrator. First of all, what does the narrator choose to tell us? Remember with, oh, was it you or was it the other? On Thursday night, I had the postgrads. And they were having quite an intense, you know, they're very used to working on teams. So often I give them permission to unmute and then they speak. And it was quite a busy conversation. But I had my goddaughter to dinner that night. So at about 5 to 7, I said to them, no, I'm signing off now. I have people to dinner. By choosing to tell them I have people to dinner, I wanted them to feel I am not simply a voice on the other hand, and to make this rather abrupt end to the lesson a bit less abrupt. And then they calmed down and they also left the meeting, and it was a nice ending. So we learn something about the narrator by what he chooses to tell us. If you look at the public discourse at the moment, one of the worst things that can be said about a person is that he was a traitor during the struggle. So this character, it's important to him that the reader and other people know that he didn't betray anybody, even though he had been in jail for such a long time. Wow! Now you are first time I looked, you were about 4. I thought I was speaking to 4 people. Listen, those of you who are new, will you kindly remember to write your name in the chat group, please? You don't need to write your name, but you must write your number in the chat line, please. Those of you who came a bit later. So in this case, we have a first-person narrator. What does the narrator choose to tell us? And that shows us his, I see or I interpret that the way that he emphasizes he didn't betray anybody. He wants to show that he is a decent, proud human being. It is a matter of honor that he hasn't betrayed anybody while being in jail. Can the reader believe the narrator? What does the narrator think of himself? He thinks he's not corrupt. He thinks that he's generally kind to other people, and he's actually fond of seeing himself as a bit of a victim. Remember where he, especially in the relationship with Desiree, he he really pursued her, and he thought it was a sign of love. From the outside, in our previous discussions about him, it looks a bit more than an obsession than true love. He thinks that he's independent, but he lives off Amazu for quite some time. How does the narrator present himself? And that is quite important. It will be a good idea if we can go. Unfortunately, I can't share this screen where I am with you because I am reading. I only have the book on my tablet. I don't have it on my laptop, but it would be a good idea if you would open your books at the first chapter. I, in my own determined and peculiar ways. So he introduces himself as an individual, not like other people. To certain approximate and exact degrees, don't think much of life. I am, however, never sure if this conclusion is without some blemish, some residue, however faint, of an ounce of madness. To certain inconclusive degrees, it is clear that some of my disappointments awaited me, gathering rust, years before I was born. So he also presents himself as a fatalist. Fatalist is spelled Fatalist. So he presents himself as somebody who cannot change his fate. Now, that implies that he doesn't have a choice. Life determines what's happening to him. He can't make a choice. And if you think about his relationship with Mercedes, where he really had the opportunity to have a rich and rewarding relationship, by his inaction, he destroys that relationship. So early in this very first paragraph, he presents himself as being the victim of life. I'm sorry, that should stop my phone. I have reason to suspect that you will find this tale unusual, but not without beauty. And remember, beauty and art is one of the themes. So he presents his story, his narrative to us as a thing of beauty that is important to him, and it will be part of art. And for that, he uses the image of a spider's web. Threads of a spider's web, perhaps, to be unwound cautiously, a skein at a time. So he introduces this idea, this very basic question: what choices do we have in life? Do we make the choices? One of the themes in the book. And then what is beauty? How do I present art, and how do I react to art? And that's very important if we look at the last chapter again. And then how does the narrator present other people? That, to my mind, became especially clear in his descriptions of Desiree. There's a time when he describes her as very, very beautiful. And then he changes that. And when he describes her in the hospital, it's actually, remember, we learned something about him, and we learned something about Desiree from the description. And look how that affects the reader and how that affects the reading of the book. Now I want you to go to the chat line if it's any way possible, because we have people from a variety of cultures represented here. And I want you to write in the chat line, I'll write in the chat line as well. What does a name mean in your specific culture? Because a name is given with a reason. And in your specific culture, when you introduce yourself with your name, what does that mean? It will be very interesting to see, because in my community, the eldest daughter is often named after the grandmother. And in my community, the surname usually indicates family, and people would often ask, my surname is Taljaard, from which Taljaards are you? So there's obviously branches of that family. What in your, I don't seem to, I hope I update as you write. What does it represent in your communities? And because I have a family name, of course, I have several cousins and aunts with the same name. I need your help here because I think that in different communities, names have different functions, and he keeps himself anonymous on purpose, right? That's the narrator's final sentence to the reader, that he's not giving him his name. And in order to understand that action, we need to speak about what does it mean to have a name. If you would rather say something, you can just put up your hand. Oh, steer clear family names and choose names which they like. That's interesting. Your parents, yes. Well, with my daughter, we still used one of my mother's names. If you would rather speak up, you can put up your hand over here on the screen, and then I'll give you permission to unmute. No tradition. So your tradition is not to name anyone after anyone, just choose names we like. No, so in your family, the names aren't that important. You choose them according to the sound or some other association. I have Zimbabwean friends and acquaintances, and often their names mean, the English names are names that represent a value, like precious, which means that that person was precious. And the one guy's name is Today. Now, I don't understand why he was called Today, but do you see a name means something? If we look at that at the end of the book, I just need to find it. One last thing. I forgot to tell you my name. Remember right at the beginning he says he's going to give you a spider's web which you have to unravel to understand. And then he says, one last thing. I forgot to tell you my name. On second thoughts, never mind. To me, there's a link between that anonymity and right at the beginning where he says, don't think much of life. And when you start thinking about the narrator, you'll have to grapple with the question, why does he prefer to stay anonymous? What does that make him? Now, within the plot of a story, we have a major plot and we have several minor plots. And sometimes in your answer, you will have to refer to both. If we look back, remember we spoke about the different storylines. If you look at the narrator and we look at the plot, the narration that he tells us, he grew up quite normal. He wasn't terribly rich or whatever, but as he grew up, he had this crush on Desiree. They had to move. It wasn't good, but it wasn't that bad. He found a job, he wrote his articles, and then he moves below the line when he is imprisoned. And he stays there for a long time, and he has that major with whom he has this kind of weird relationship. Then the struggle becomes successful, and he is released from prison. He finds Desiree again. He has a job. He has a place to live. He meets Gabriel. He meets Mercedes. He has this good relationship with Mercedes. And then Gabriel says, you're not really good enough for my daughter. You won't look after her. And they leave. He loses his job. He tries to busk, but that isn't very successful. Desiree overdoses and goes into a coma. And at the end, he ends up in that dilapidated caravan where he expects to die. Because he forages and he lives off the water that they have and so on. So do you see that in a novel, I told you that in a short story, it's very difficult to have this kind of plot line, but that we can have it in a novel. And I hope you see that if you use the plot line to follow this, that as a kind of a figurative timeline, you will be able to remember the story better. Now, if we look at Mercedes, she is she's a minor, she's an important character, but she's still a minor character because the narrator remains the main character. Mercedes is a minor character. When she enters the story, she is actually quite happy. She has this very rewarding career as a music teacher. She and the narrator has a good relationship. And then the relationships, her father doesn't believe that she will be properly looked after, and they decide to leave South Africa. When she gets to Cuba, her father doesn't look after her, she has to look after him. He becomes a burden. She can't teach music anymore. She weaves baskets for a living at the end. So within the overarching story, we have these subplots, and they may differ from the main plot. I spoke to you about how we have to remember on Saturday, Melissa wrote about conflict, and I reminded her that when we speak about conflict, we need to look at external and internal conflict. Now, I want you to remember that when you speak about the setting, you need to refer to the movement between the eras and the physical movement between two places. What's interesting about this book, this novel, is I've already explained to you that the external conflict, when we meet him as a child, he at least had, they're not very rich, but at least he can survive. At the end, he lives like some kind of subhuman in a dilapidated caravan, and he only plays his trumpet or saxophone or his musical instrument. But if we look at his internal conflict, it is a different story. He starts off with this total obsession with Desiree. And then he does get a career. He manages to keep to his own sense of integrity. What is important, what isn't important. And at the end, and here I just need to, it's difficult for me sometimes to move between chapters on my tablet. But if you look at chapter 15, on page 149. There's no freer feeling than sitting on the highest stone ledge overlooking the valley and blowing the trumpet amid startled lizards and cautious birds. I'll answer your question now, Melissa. I point the trumpet into the valley below, play meditative tunes. Meditative, it means that he's meditating, he is reflecting, he's thinking. To heartwarming response from echoes that seem to emerge from God himself. There is a peculiar harmony in listening to the valley mimic my horn, an overwhelming sense of existence in the company of rabbits and falcons. And rabbits, prey, falcons, predators, raptors. So, if in the next paragraph, hunger pangs have taught me to stone small game with admirable precision, to bury my meat deep in the river next to the caravan, ensure it stays there by rolling a boulder over it. Remember, I spoke about his inactivity, his inaction. When his contract at the tourism office ended, and how he couldn't bring himself to actually look for a new job. And how disdainfully he rejected the offer of playing in a bar or a place that he didn't like. Now he's out in nature and nobody can hear him, and now he plays. So if we go back to Melissa's question, from the narrator's perspective, would he see his life at the end of the novel as below the line? I think that that's why, Melissa, we need to look at the external conflict and the internal conflict. And I think if you look at it from the outside, he ends up having a kind of subsistence out in the wild. But when we look at his internal conflict, he moved to peace. And remember, in right at the beginning, when we started speaking about, in this slide, I spoke about the complexity. So in your answer, if you are asked about the conclusion of the novel, to what conclusion do they come about the themes? It is where we bring out complexity and discussion, and we use words like although he ends up like a kind of tramp out in the wild. He has made peace, and then you can quote or a quote from his meditative playing, or you can, if you're not allowed to have your book with you that you can find the exact quote, you can refer to his instance. And whereas in the city, Busking is quite a passive way of getting money. You stand there, and whether people pay you or not, you play and you hope somebody will put some money in your hat. Whereas in that extract I read to you now, where he actually has taught himself to find meat, he now is far more reactive. So Melissa, in what I see from the remarks they've made up till now, you are more or less entitled to your own opinion, as long as you can motivate it from the book. Alison, I can only remember that she went into a coma. I don't know. You'll have to check. I'm sorry if I confused you. Just read that chapter again and make sure yourself. I can only now remember that she went into a coma. I apologize if I upset you. Melissa, I hope that you see that in order to answer your question fully, one needs to refer to the internal and external conflict. So within the major plot, we have minor plots, and I think it will be a good idea if you look at make sure that you have the plot line of the major events and also of the subplots. We spoke about this. Now, the other two words that you need to know is the climax and the resolution. The climax is the point at which the highest level of interest and emotional response is achieved. Another explanation would be, at the peak of the story, the main event occurs in which the main character faces the conflict. Remember, if we go back to the plot line, he had been going down for some things had been going bad for some time. He lost his job. He lost the place where he lived. Desiree went into a coma. And then when he loses the job at Cafe Mesopotamia, he simply starts walking. So to my mind, that's the moment where he faces the conflict. And then the resolution. If we can go back to that slide, we have the resolution somewhere there. He now has decided that he can't live in the city, and he starts walking. And the denouement is then let's say, this last bit of the story. And to my mind, the resolution is that bit where he finds that bit where he plays his trumpet is the resolution, where he finds some kind of peace. And because he has found that peace, he is not raging against the bees that might kill him. Not a gunshot, not a hangman's noose, not double pneumonia, not hunger, nor a brutalized heart. I was killed by bees, small things. But do you see that previously he was very angry? Remember how angry he was in Cafe Mesopotamia, where he speaks about the sugar daddies and how he wishes he could clear the place of the sugar daddies and the girls looking for boyfriends there. But because he has found some kind of peace in his art, in his ability to play the trumpet, he can accept his death gracefully. So the resolution is where he found peace, and then the tie-up and summation of the plot elements in the story. Now, in the exam, you will need, please people, I've seen a few papers where when you send it to me for it to be critically read, where I could burst into tears because I know that I can see you've worked hard, but you haven't read every line in the question. Do not assume that you've read the question unless you've read from the question to the very last point. Distinguish between the instructions and the guidelines. And the guidelines, remember, are also the guidelines for the people marking your paper. So if you go off on a tangent, it might be a valuable, valid tangent, but you might not be marked for it because it's not within the limits of the paper. In your in the 501 on page 77, they start off and they've given you a kind of mock question there about love is an important theme in the novel. To show whether the statement is true, critically analyze the following extract from the first chapter of the novel. If you haven't done the activity, I suggest that you do the activity again before the exam, because what they do in this between 77 and 70 and 81, they more or less guide you through writing an exam paper, the essay again. Then please go to the tutorial letter 203, where there's feedback on the essays that you've written, and compare your essay to what they have done in that letter. If you do not understand why you didn't get your mark, contact me or contact the e-tutor so that you can clear that up before you start writing the exam. Now, I check the information from the department daily. Up till now, what I can't tell you is, do you have permission to write an open book exam? So may you have the book and the short stories with you? Or are you not supposed to have them with you because you are writing an online exam? If you're not allowed to have the books with you and consult the book during the exam, you need to be able to support your argument with detailed references to the text. I promise you, I've read the book 2.5 times, and I am now confused exactly why did Desiree end up in hospital. So do you see how important it is to know exactly what is going on in the book and to know the plot very well. And also, you have to ask them how, but make sure from your e-tutor before you start with the exam and start prepping for the exam, exactly how the time limit will work. How are they going to measure how much time you've spent on the paper? But now let's have a look at the structure of the literary essay. Remember when we did the short stories, we worked on the structure of the paragraph. So now I want you to look at the structure of the introduction. These things must be in the introduction. The name and surname of the author, and afterwards you mention the surname only, and the name of the text. So in the novel, Small Things by name of the author, he sets out to tell the story of a nameless narrator who has to make a living after having been discharged from prison after 18 years in prison. First, he works in a tourist office. Then he busks before he starts working in Cafe Mesopotamia, and he ends up as an indigenous tramp in the bushes. The thesis statement we'll speak about now. When you find the extract, you need to contextualize the extract. That means that you have to say what happened just before it, what happened afterwards, and how is this extract related to other events in the book. And then in your thesis statement, you would have said what you are trying to prove. So now you have to indicate how you are trying to prove it. So here I have, and last time it was difficult for you because we work on 2 slides. So you will see that I posted the possible exam question, and remember I have no direct line to Pretoria. This was merely a question I set up based on what you had as an assignment. But I want us to look at this and then see if you can write an introduction. One of the ways in which characteristics are revealed in small things is the ways in which characters interact. Using the extract below as a starting point, write an essay in which you discuss how the characters are developed and linked to specific themes in the novel. Remember to quote from the extract and refer to other sections of the novel to support your argument. Now, I had to fill, you can go to the pages if you have your book with me. I quote very sparingly because I needed to fill it in on one slide. It is that letter from Mercedes, the pockets of greed, but that is the nature of revolutions. They all have discomforts. Anyway, I have to go, my poet. Please, please, please write. Love, Mercedes. What do I say now? She has gone such eerie transformation. A music teacher turned weaver of baskets. Becoming a chubby weaver of baskets with expressionless eyes. You have the possible exam question with you. Let's go back to the structure of the introduction. Write your first sentence and the first 2 or 3 lines what the text is about. If you have the courage, I honestly won't criticize you. And remember, you have an opportunity to add to your knowledge. So if the more of you write in the chat lines, the more feedback I can give to the group. So write the first 3 steps. See if you can write that in the chat lines or with yourself so that we can work on the thesis statement. I'm going to give you about 4 minutes. Nusimba, I pasted a mock exam question into the chat lines. And this is the structure of the introduction. And I want you to do the first 3 steps in the chat line so that I can help you to get the introduction correctly. Oh, you'll find I had had some tea while you were struggling away. Anybody in the chat line? Rivka, why are you so late? Alison cleared it up. She said Desiree had a bad heart. That's why she went into a coma. And that's why the narrator specifically refers to what didn't kill him in the conclusion, and specifically says that a bad heart didn't kill him. Okay, Rivka, you can listen to the to the workshop because it's being recorded. Did nobody try and write in the first the first three. It should be uploaded. Jacques is on, at the office tomorrow, so it should be uploaded tomorrow, the recording. Now, ladies, if and gentlemen, if we look here, check your introduction. You must have the name and surname of the author, and if you refer to the author again, I would advise you, when we look at the conclusion, I'm going to think we'll have a look at the conclusion on the 19th of October. You have the surname only. You must have the name of the text and 2 or 3 lines what the text is about. Now, I want you to have a look at the thesis statement. It's a core statement about what you want to achieve in your essay. So your thesis statement will refer to characterization and the themes revealed by the extracts. If you look at it, the pockets of greed, but that is the nature of revolutions. They all have discomforts. Mercedes is writing to the narrator, telling him about how difficult life is in Cuba now that they are back. And that is a reference to the theme of a country in transition, a country growing into a democracy. Then if you look at Mercedes, the courage to admit that she really wants him to write back. And if you look at it, she doesn't ask him for help, even though life is hard on her side. If you read that part on page 139 properly, it is she writes to him, she assures him of her love and that she misses him, but she never sees herself as a victim. So what do we learn from this? Remember I said it's not only what a character does, it's also what the character doesn't do. And Mercedes tells him, I'd love you to write to me, but she doesn't ask him for money or help. There's a dignity in Mercedes. And I have to go, my poet. So even though at that stage, remember that a landlady of his, the rain came in and she lost all his poetry and everything. But I have to go, my poet, signals her belief in his potential. And then, what do I say now that she has gone such eerie transformation, a music teacher turned weaver of baskets? Can you see the difference between Mercedes and the narrator? Mercedes is prepared to work to keep her dignity and to support herself and to support her father. That we can see from Mercedes's behavior. But what do we learn about the narrator in the way that he tells us about Mercedes? It shows a lack of respect and insight and appreciation for Mercedes's pride and dignity and her resolution to be a self-reliant woman. Also, I feel uncomfortable with the way that he refers to a weaver of baskets. Because to weave baskets is traditionally a woman's work. And I don't like the idea of men degenerating women's work. And then his lack of sympathy and superficiality. She's becoming a chubby weaver. Chubby is not, if we think in terms of addiction, connotation and denotation, chubby means a little fat, but the connotation is not it's not a compliment to call somebody chubby. Weaver of baskets, and he keeps on repeating it as if it's menial, instead of respecting a woman with so much potential who's prepared to do any kind of work to be independent. And then the cruelest is this expressionless eyes. It's not expressionless. She has lost her joie de vivre, her enjoyment of life, because world is so hard. Now, I have said quite a lot about this. And I'm glad that that there are other remarks about his lack of respect. In this, remember on one of the previous slides, when we spoke about the narrator, how does the narrator present other people? And how does the narrator present himself? Do you see how this plays into becomes part of what we know about his character? If we now go back to that slide, I have said many things. How are we going to build this into the thesis statement? I gave you the two themes. A structure I give to the postgrad students who have to write thesis statements would be this one, by. Then you need a verb and something that you are going to do with the verb. Choose another verb and something that you are doing with the verb. See if you can try. It's close to 7. I'll understand if you leave the class, but tonight I don't have people for dinner. So it's so important to work on this thesis statement that we can, I don't mind if we stay a bit longer. Melissa asked, would we need to address the interaction between all, why did it move from the, would we need to address the interaction between all the characters in the novel to answer this question, or only between the narrator and Mercedes? Melissa, I would concentrate on the narrator and Mercedes. You can have a kind of side reference maybe here and there, but I think in this case there's enough in this extract to write your, usually in the exam it's 1.5 or 2 pages, to cover 1.5 to 2 pages. That is kind of my thesis statement. It's not perfect, but do you see that I indicate what I am going to do? I am going to look at the reaction of Mercedes and the narrator to the transition in their respective countries. And then I'm going to have a contrast between how they respond to each other. And that will give me an overview, evaluation of how the characters are revealed in the novel. But so if I were you, I would try and write a thesis statement a day. Because can you see how the thesis statement actually kind of, because I have thought about this, because I have done this, the next, that one, it becomes easier to indicate the structure. Personally, but this is the structure they want. That's the structure you keep to. I would have preferred the contextualization to be just before the thesis statement, but that's not the way they have it in the book. This is the way that you do it. And then when we contextualize it, it's very easy to contextualize it. Think in your, I'll again write it on the slide. You can't use an abbreviation in the, I can, in this case. I now have this as kind of separate paragraphs because we are doing it in separate steps. But remember, all of this would have been in one paragraph. We have the thesis statement, we have contextualize it. How are you going to structure it? Remember your answer, it's important that you struggle with your own answer, because it's a literary exam, not a history exam. You can't learn this off by heart. What you need to do is to say by and then what happens. Those are the constructions I want to bring to your attention. What else that I want you to notice is in this extract. Now remember that examiner, apparently they paid quite well, but they get something like 7,000 papers, or 700, sorry, it's 700 papers to mark at the time. So they have to mark quickly. If you use a phrase like in this extract, you remember to contextualize, and the examiner can see you have contextualized. Now the next one is the structure of the novel. If we go back to here and we think of our discussion of this, do you see that here we can speak about her acceptance of the situation? So then you say on and then you used words like firstly, next sentence, thereafter. So here we are going to have a comparison. We are going to compare how did the one react, how does that the other one react. Thereafter, narrator's behavior, and will be contrasted. Sorry, my typing is now out. But do you see how these three things follow one another? It would be a good idea if you kind of set yourself a kind of mock exam. Previously, they had they had the other books, and there were years of papers, and every time I could simply give them different old exam papers, but that's not possible at the moment. But you can write mock introductions and give them to me or to the e-tutor to evaluate and explain to you what to do. Because if you can write the introduction properly, the rest of the essay follows quite easily. Let me see your nice faces again. So, ladies and gentlemen, any questions about the novel? Okay, I think we have done quite a lot of work. I am seeing you on the 19th as preparation for the exam. If you have any queries that you would like us to discuss on the 19th, you can simply post them to the chat line, because the chat line is very much like a WhatsApp group, and I have Teams on all my devices. So it doesn't matter where I am, I'll see your question, and if I can't respond immediately, I'll respond when I'm back at my computer. So, but ladies, you must try, and ladies and gentlemen, you must try and write as much as possible. Okay. We ran a bit over time. I hope you have time to go and prepare food and have a peaceful evening. Then I see you on the 19th at 5:30. Thank you.